is Ingrid Potts. And Ingrid works for MRIGlobal in Kansas City. She is the Transportation Research Center Manager. She has been with Transportation Research for over 22 years. Ingrid also works for HNTB in the past in geometric design. Ingrid holds a master's degree from Texas A&M. And on her spare time, out of work, Ingrid enjoys her family.
Thank you. I should have mentioned in the lightning round that the title in the program is not correct. So if you are here interested in hearing about using crash data for analyzing the safety of driveways, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I could talk about that, but I'd be making it up as I go along. So what I am here to talk about is design and access management for trucks. This is an NCHRP project that's underway. And I want to acknowledge also Jerry Gluck from AECOM, who is on the team and unfortunately couldn't stay through Thursday. He was just here on Tuesday. All right, where's my gadget? Here we go. So just some background on the project. As we know, there are highway agencies and cities that establish truck routes for through trucks to be able to negotiate through the roadway and for it to be designed a little bit differently for trucks. In some cases, states do this very formally. In other cases, they don't have formal designated truck routes, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Agencies are always also implementing access management treatments to facilitate more efficient and safe movement of vehicles along the roadway, and this is also good for trucks. It's just that certain access management treatments may be more problematic for trucks than others. And then in many agencies, and we've heard a lot about this week, having incorporated the complete streets concept and are dealing with the issue of balancing the needs of various roadway users. Often in that, we hear primarily about accommodating peds and bikes, but trucks are also out there and needing to get around and get through various corridors. And that balance of those three, peds, bikes, and trucks, is very difficult, and agencies are feeling challenged with that. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that this was a theme we've heard from highway agencies, is balancing the needs of trucks with other users is a really tough challenge, because in many cases, the needs work against each other. So the objective of our research is to produce a set of guidelines to help highway agencies better accommodate trucks. To some extent, our guidelines will include information on site layout for sites, but that's not as much of the focus. It's primarily looking at access management techniques and design treatments for truck routes. Just as in the spirit of scope, we're looking at pretty much anything other than freeways because those are already access controlled. We're focused more on urban suburban areas, but we're looking at rural areas as well. So since this research isn't finished, I can't report on what's in the guidelines or anything like that. So I'm basically drawing some highlights from what we've done so far, which is a literature review, a survey of highway agencies, and what I'm enjoying the most is meeting with various highway agencies in person and having discussions about how they manage their facilities with consideration of trucks. So we'll just start with a highlight from the literature review. And this is very brief, but I wanted to certainly highlight the Access Management Manual because it does have a good section that talks about considerations for trucks on the roadway. I won't read all of these things. I'll give you a chance to take a look at it. But it was very nice when I came across that in the literature review to see that there was a nice section about trucks. And it goes on into the second page even, just considerations for access management and trucks. The problem is this is a very nice list of great ideas and difficult to implement all of them. And so our guidance will hopefully point agencies towards those that are more beneficial to trucks or maybe give the most bang for the buck, or where certain locations you might do some of these and other locations you might consider different ones. And then some highlights from the Highway Agency Survey. We did an online survey of the 50 state highway agencies and quite a few local agencies as well to hear about their experience with implementing design treatments and access management techniques to accommodate trucks. Just in the area of agency policies, we asked them about procedures for reviewing arterial roadways to select truck routes. We basically focused several questions on the designation of truck routes. And a third of the respondents have a formal procedure for reviewing roadways for selection of truck routes. And then of those, only half reported a formal consideration of access management treatments in that procedure. So I found that to be interesting. In planning for trucks, we asked, how are trucks considered in the planning process for rural and urban arterials? And then these are some takeaways from the responses that we got. Presence and volume or percent of trucks are incorporated into various analyses. Truck types and volumes are used to determine design vehicles. The design vehicles, we asked a lot of questions about that. There was more consistency about that across the agencies than I anticipated. Trucks are considered in geometric design of intersections and in the development plans for access and egress to and from sites on a truck route. Then we asked about the consideration of pedestrians and bicyclists in transit. And interestingly enough, most respondents indicated that all potential roadway users are considered and that it is important to balance their needs. I just want a little sidelight note here. When we asked, what could you use most in guidelines? It was how to do that. It was, we need guidance on how to incorporate all of the users in our design, how to balance the needs of trucks with peds and bikes. Some had indicated that historically trucks had been favored over other user groups, but that the design philosophy has recently shifted in the other direction to considering peds and bikes more explicitly. And then many talked about the complete streets guidelines and context-sensitive design principles and other ways in which they consider multimodal guidance. Of course, we wanted to know about the operational and safety issues for trucks that they have experienced in their agency. And several agencies had noted that the operations and safety have actually improved for trucks when access management tools have been applied along a route. And then I have a few items that they listed where there were some operational and safety issues encountered. So many of them talked about U-turns and the challenges with trucks making U-turns due to poor access planning and design. Then, of course, encroachment is a big issue. Encroachment on the other lanes during a turning maneuver. And again, balancing this with pedestrians and bicyclists is a real challenge. And then here's a list of some other things. Stopping and backing maneuvers. We know that that's difficult when driveways aren't designed to facilitate trucks turning in and out. Inadequate storage length. One of the issues that came up is when there are closely spaced signals, then the left turn lanes aren't long enough. And then not only is that difficult for trucks wanting to turn left, but when regular traffic backs into through lanes and trucks are really trying to get somewhere on time, that really is frustrating to them as well. Challenges navigating roundabouts, delivery and circulation issues, and so on. These are all things that I feel like we've been talking about this week, just maybe not in the context of trucks necessarily. So highlights from meetings with highway agencies. We also talked to some trucking associations and just last week with some trucking operators, which was fascinating. We have met with Kansas, met with Nelda while we were there, Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, New York, and New Jersey. We have still planned meetings with California, Florida, and Washington. And then we've met with several MPOs. Last Friday, met with the Port Authority got there, they manage different facilities, and so that was really interesting as well. And then meeting with the trucking operator so that we can get a perspective from their side. What is it from their side that is difficult, or from their perspective, that is difficult to navigate through? What works well, what doesn't work well? With the highway agencies, we tried to meet with staff from these various areas. So not just design and engineering and planning, but also looking at maintenance and permitting, and truck regulation and enforcement. We don't always get staff from each of these areas, but in some cases, we've been able to get a nice cross-section of areas of expertise. So on the issue of designation of truck routes, as I mentioned earlier, some states formally designate truck routes, but actually many do not. And then in one state that at the state level does not designate truck routes, their local agencies do designate truck routes on their routes. But also that state at the state level does have different geometric criteria based on percentage of trucks. So that's how they deal with that. Roundabouts. I'm going to jump to the second bullet because one of the trucking operators last week said, when I just opened it up for discussion, and immediately he said, roundabouts. We love roundabouts, which is interesting because some states have indicated that roundabouts are a problem with trucks. But I would say in the majority of the meetings we've had, roundabouts actually can work very well for trucks. One agency started to use flatter grade on aprons because initially they had a steeper grade on the aprons and the trucks were reluctant to use them for fear of rollover. Another agency said that trucks just were reluctant to use aprons that had the stamped concrete because they didn't want to mess up the bricks. So the agency started putting tire marks on the apron to encourage their use. Another agency, and I'll get to that a little bit later too, had mentioned, or I think it's on the next slide, I'll just say it now, had mentioned the use of aprons on the outside of roundabouts would be very helpful. Actually, that was one of the trucking companies last week. And I don't know that I've seen that, but I thought that was a good idea, that we don't necessarily need to only put it on the inside of the roundabout. Location of poles and posts and signs is very important so that trucks don't hit those. Another agency mentioned that they have very few truck crashes at roundabouts. While I was preparing this presentation and looking for pictures, I actually came across the Washington State DOT website that they have guidance on their website for accommodating trucks at roundabouts. So I just thought I would include that here. And maybe there are many other agencies that do as well, but I came across that and thought I would include it. Include the fact that they do that and a photo that they had there. So this is a video. One state designs roundabouts to handle oversized trucks. And this is a video that was sent to us of a windmill wind blade navigating through a roundabout. And it's only 1 minute long, and I wanted to share it. So I have no control over the volume, I don't think. I think it was Kansas, if you don't mind me saying.
Looks like it's working.
As he gets further along, pay attention to the poles and how close it seems that they get, but they make it work, the back end.
Knows what he's doing.
Right there.
Right on that curb.
And then at this end, you can see they could use an apron on the outside, just as the trucking operator had mentioned. But they make it work. And then he's fully on the apron at the back end. That's pretty much it. I can't remember if it was Kansas or Missouri, but one of those states said at certain locations where they experience, frequent, relatively speaking, frequent oversized, overweight loads going through a roundabout, they've designed the roundabout to be accessible directly across the middle of the roundabout. So they have a gate put up, and when they know that a truck like this is going to be coming through, then they open the gate, and basically it would be, I guess, as if the whole roundabout was an apron and the truck just drives straight across that middle part. So I guess that there are ways to do this. For intersections, right turns at intersections were noted to be most problematic for one particular agency, but I'm sure that's pretty common. Another noted that moving they move stop bars back to accommodate trucks turning, especially when the curb radius is tight. And they showed us images of several intersections where that stop bar was moved quite a ways back. Whether trucks are encroaching on opposing lanes or adjacent lanes or trying to avoid encroaching causes traffic operational delays. Another mentioned that signal timing can be a problem. And then, as I already talked about, the closely spaced signals and storage length of left turn lanes. The trucking companies mentioned that they appreciate wider approach widths. And then it was mentioned that, and I think this was in New York, they had modified a 4-lane undivided arterial to a 3-lane cross-section with a 2-way left turn lane. And I cannot remember if parking was also included in that reconstruction or not, but clearly it makes it easier for pedestrians when you go from the 4 through lanes to the 2 through lanes. But the trucks also noted that it makes it easier to make turns, particularly right turns, because you're no longer right up against that curb in that right lane. If that lane is pulled away a bit or made wider, they can make that right turn from further away from the curb. So there was an example of something that accommodates the peds and bikes, or at least the peds, as well as trucks. One of the things that someone from the trucking association or trucking company mentioned is that, we try to keep parking pushed back from driveways for sight distance purposes, but that trucks pulling in and out of that driveway, sometimes it is just physically impossible to make that turn when the parking is too close to the driveway. And I hadn't thought about that, so that was an interesting takeaway. Also, it was mentioned increased throat length to minimize backing up onto the street, as well as increased driveway and throat width and or increased turning radius. One of the trucking companies mentioned, gosh, if we could just have mountable curbs near the vicinity of the driveways, they can transition them to a more vertical curb further away, but just in the vicinity of that turn into and out of a driveway, if those curbs could be mountable, would be really helpful. As I mentioned, in this area of balancing peds, bikes, and trucks, it's a key area that highway agencies are seeking guidance. One agency noted that they increased the shoulder width from 2 to 4 feet where bicyclists are prevalent near a plant that generates high truck volumes. When locating bike routes, they said try and avoid industrial areas or even industrial driveways. And they noted a case, I think it was where a UPS facility was, where the agency had put a bike lane. And so the UPS trucks are crossing this bike lane all the time. So that's a challenge. And then they also mentioned that where frequent parking, short, really quick parking for delivery, where there's a bike lane, they have to park in the bike lane to make those deliveries. But in New York City, I think it was, the tickets for parking in the through lane are less expensive than parking in the bike lane, so they actually park in the through lane. So it was sort of an unintended consequence of putting that bike lane there. So yeah, they double parked, I guess is what they called it. So in general, trucking issues, this was a theme, that trucking issues are expected to only grow due to the prevalence of online shopping now. The deliveries are only going up, the needs for parking near buildings are only going up. And so, it's not something that's going to go away. Also in the area of parking, I don't know how much this relates to access management, but truck parking in general, whether it is for, needing to get rest after they've reached their limit, or in one case, they mentioned the truckers can only arrive at this think it was a grocery store or distribution center. They can only arrive between a certain window. And then as soon as they deliver, if they've reached the end of their time for driving, they cannot stay there because of food laws. They cannot be anywhere near the distribution center after they've delivered the food. They need to get out. And so trucks are finding themselves on our routes, but not having a place to rest or wait for their window for delivery and so on. So just parking in general is a problem for trucks. Also in distribution centers, in the vicinity of those, some of these other things that we've talked about, consideration of placement of stop bars, storage length for turning, signal timing, and so on. And then in the vicinity of service areas, the interchange design is an issue, particularly if service areas are placed too close to the interchange, then that corridor becomes really jammed up. Whenever a new developer is coming that will generate a lot of truck traffic, there should be a coordinated discussion between transportation agencies and trucking industries. And I think of that, Karen, were you talking about the median in one particular location because there were clearance issues for trucks going under overpasses, and so they needed to not have a raised median in a particular location. Well, if there had been, in general, a discussion, they would know that they just needed that in that one place. But in the case that you were talking about, they just sort of made a broad breadth decision to not place medians anywhere in that jurisdiction. So I think communication is really important. How are we doing on time? Okay. I think this is my last slide. So just some key goals in balancing truck routing and access management consideration. Select truck routes that either already have appropriate access management techniques in place or that can be improved to provide appropriate access management for trucks. Establish access management guidelines along new or established truck routes without limiting the maneuverability of trucks. Improve access management design on truck routes where truck access needs are not being met. And then finally, implement access management techniques on truck routes with consideration of all user types. Like I said, that is a really big theme with the agencies. So with that, I will take questions, or if anyone has any great treatments that you're using that work well for trucks, we'd love to hear them.
Wisconsin has that drive-through oversized roundabout. So if anybody wants to see it, I can put you onto a Google map and you can see it. It's a garage door opener, puts the arm up, guy goes through it, his big oversized
Good.
road.
I can say it. So in the study, are there any considerations for autonomous vehicles and any guidance around that? Because I'm thinking if you do, for example, as you said, the oversized roundabouts or the use of the apron, is that something that is being considered and how that would function in the more autonomous trucking world? Or
That was not part of the scope of the research, and it hasn't come up in any of the conversations that we've had with highway agencies, but it is certainly an issue that will need to be considered in the future.
In your study, when you interview the trucking association, I didn't see the question on because the truck use a lot of the interstate, so interchange, ramp design, or rest area, because truck use a lot of that. So when you interview, do you also interview like a focus group for some actually truck driver, not just the association, that may help, a lot of truck driver, they drive a lot of miles, how many years experience, that kind of the, focus group interview. I don't know if you use that approach.
Yep, absolutely. So we started by reaching out to the highway agencies first, the state highway agencies. Then when we got those scheduled, we would reach out to some local agencies in the area to see if we could coordinate some meetings on that same trip with them. We got a few of those under our belt and then have started reaching out to the trucking associations and some truck companies to meet with them. And our first one with a trucking company or a focus group with several trucking companies was last week. So we're just getting started on that, but we plan to reach out to more of those in the next month or two. So, because yeah, the perspective from their side is really, really important, and it was really eye-opening, some of the things that they mentioned last week when we met with them.
Yeah, you mentioned about the accommodating truck. I think this is similar to what when we did the mini roundabout study. So I think with the super large truck, as long as you provide the means for them to get through, we don't really have to worry about whether they lower the traffic level of service, because
Right.
they just don't come that frequent,
Right, yeah, I think, yeah, they have to, kind of sort of shut it down for a few minutes, but as you saw, this video was just 1 minute long and the truck, was more or less through. So I don't think the operational side is a big issue of getting trucks through a roundabout.
When the truck comes, that whole intersection becomes the truck.
Right, right.
Any other questions? I'd like to thank Ingrid for putting on a presentation.
All right, thank you.